Hi guys, Ryan here. Today I'm going to show you how to install WordPress on your Raspberry Pi. If that sounds of interest to you, then make sure to like this video, and without further ado, let's head over to the computer and connect to our Pi. Now we're at the computer, we need to connect to our Raspberry Pi. So for that I'm going to be using PuTTY, which we set up in episode 1 of this series, but you can follow along with the terminal built into the Raspberry Pi. So just logging into the Pi now. So now that we're into the Pi, the first thing we need to do is make sure our repositories and our packages are up to date. So to do that, we're first going to do sudo apt-get update. This is updating the repositories to make sure we're getting packages from the right places. So now that that's updated, we're now going to do sudo apt-get upgrade. This now updates the packages installed on our system. It's now asking us if we're okay to do these updates, so just press Y and enter and it'll do the updates for you. Okay, now it's finished updating, we can now install WordPress. So before we do that, we need to make sure we've got Apache, PHP and MySQL installed on the Pi. If you haven't got this done already, make sure you check out part 2 and 3 of these series where we cover how to do that. So to install WordPress, we need to install it in our Apache web server location. So first let's navigate to that with cd/var/www/html. And if we list all the items in this directory, we have our Pi-hole and Pi-hole admin websites and also an index.html. If we go to the IP address of our Raspberry Pi through a web browser, we can see that we get the Apache 2 web page, which means we've got Apache installed. So now we can start downloading the WordPress files that we need. To download the WordPress files that we need, we run this command, sudo wget and then the URL of the latest WordPress packages. Running this will connect to the WordPress site and download the files we need. It's about 15 megabytes of files. To extract the files from the zip, we need to run the following command, sudo tar xzf and then the compressed file name. Running this will extract it into a folder called WordPress, which we can see if we type ls. We now have a directory called WordPress and we also have this zipped file. So let's remove the zip file and we'll just be working with this WordPress folder now. To remove this file, we need to run the sudo rm latest.tar.gz command, and running that removes it, as we can see. Now we have two options. We can either move every file from the WordPress directory directly into our HTML directory, which means we just have to go to our IP address to access the WordPress site, or we can leave them in the directory, which I'm going to do, which means we have to go to our IP address /WordPress to access our site. The reason I'm doing this is because I've got Pi-hole installed on the server and I might add some more sites in the future, so I want to keep them separated. The next thing we need to do is give Apache the permissions it needs to be able to provide these files as a site. So to do that, we need to move to our WordPress directory with cd WordPress and then run the following command to give permissions to all the files in this folder. Okay, so that's part 1 complete, where we've got WordPress downloaded and the permissions set up. We now need to set up the database for WordPress. So to do this, we need to enter the MySQL command line. So we run sudo mysql/uroot/p and enter our password. Okay, now that I'm in the MySQL database, I first need to create a WordPress database, and then I need to give the root user permissions to this database. So first, creating the database, I run create database WordPress semicolon and click enter. And now giving the root user permissions to this database, I run grant all privileges on WordPress.star to root at localhost identified by password. And then here we need to enter the password for our root user and click enter. And now we need to flush the privileges, which means just make sure the MySQL database is up to date with the most recent privileges that we've added. To do this, we simply run flush privileges semicolon and click enter. And now we can control D to exit the MySQL terminal. And that's it, our database is now set up for WordPress. The final thing to do now is reboot our Raspberry Pi, and then the rest of the installation is done through the web browser. So sudo reboot to reboot the Pi. Now let's open a browser and go to the IP address of our Raspberry Pi. If we put WordPress into a separate directory like I did, then we need to go to our IP address /WordPress. Okay, so if the installation worked, you should be greeted with the WordPress setup page. So let's first select our language, so English UK. And now it's saying that we'll need to know the database name we set up, a database username and password, a database host, and table prefix. So let's click Let's Go and get started. Okay, so the database name we set up is WordPress. The username we're going to be using is root. The password for root is whatever you set up as your root MySQL password in the previous episodes. The next thing it's asking for is our database host. Because we're running the database on the Pi as well as the web server on the Pi, we just put the local host. But if, for example, we were hosting a separate server outside of the Pi, then we put the IP address of that host here. And then finally, the table prefix. So we just want it to put WP underscore in front of all the tables it's going to create. And let's click submit once we're done. Okay, so it's saying it's worked, it's been able to communicate with the database, so now we'll run the installation. And it's asking us for a site title, so I'm just going to put Raspberry site, but if you want to put a different site for your WordPress name, that's fine. Now we need to create a username for our WordPress user. This username is going to be different to the username we use to our Pi. This is solely for access to a WordPress site through a web browser. So I'm just going to call it WordPress admin. And our password, it's recommending a strong password, but we can use our own here. For example, my password it's saying is very weak, so I need to confirm that I'm okay using a weak password. Because I'm only using this locally, that's going to be fine for me. But if I was doing this for a proper WordPress site, I'd use a much more secure password. Next, it's asking us for the email address to associate with this WordPress username. Okay, now it's asking us, do we want to discourage search engines from indexing this site? Because I'm running this locally, that doesn't really matter to me. But if you're using this Raspberry Pi as a development system to create a WordPress site that you want to move to production in the future, then you don't want to click this checkbox because you don't want your production site from being discouraged to be indexed. With all of this set up, we can now install WordPress. Once it's done, it's telling us our username and the password is our chosen password. So let's log in. WordPress admin. And then the password that we selected. And now we click login. Okay, now we're logged into the WordPress dashboard, which means our WordPress site is all set up. If we go back to our WordPress URL, so either your IP address or your IP address /WordPress, you can see it's now got our WordPress site created. However, there is one more thing we need to do. We need to allow WordPress to change the links for certain posts and pages through Apache. So by default, this isn't allowed. Apache only points to files that it can find. However, we need to enable a mod for Apache, which will allow WordPress to change the URLs of things like blog pages and other pages you create. So to do this, let's open up Putty again and run the following commands. Okay, the first command we need to run allows the rewrite mod to be enabled through Apache. So to do this, we do sudo a2en mod rewrite. Okay, so running that command just installed the rewrite mod onto our system, but we now need to enable it through the Apache config file for our specific site. So to do that, we need to run the following command, sudo nano /etc /apache2 sites available 000-default.config. Okay, with the config file open, we need to come down to here and add the following 3 lines. The first one tells the config file which directory we're talking about. We're talking about /var www html, which is our web server. Then we need to add the value allow override all, which will allow the WordPress site to override all URLs, which will allow it to redirect to the correct blog posts and pages you create. And then finally, we just close off the directory tag. So if we hold Control and X, and then we can click Y and enter, and that'll save our file. With the config file changed, we finally have to reboot Apache and then change some settings in WordPress. To restart Apache, we run sudo service apache2 restart and click enter. And with that Apache command run, we can now open our WordPress site and go to the admin page, which is the URL /wp-admin. And now we go into our settings and permalinks. And now we select post name, which will make the URLs so much more friendly for our WordPress site. And we need to make sure we click Save Changes. And that's it. You've got your WordPress site set up on your Raspberry Pi. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to click the thumbs up and subscribe. And if you didn't, give me feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.